The red warning lights bathed the cockpit in an eerie crimson glow as Colonel Sarah Phoenix Mitchell felt the familiar weight of 30 lives pressing down on her shoulders. At 47 years old, she was supposedly too old for the F-35 Lightning II program, or so the Pentagon brass had whispered behind closed doors just 18 months earlier. Now, as she pushed the stealth fighter through hostile airspace at Mach 1.2, those same voices had fallen silent. The lives of 30 American pilots hung in the balance, and Sarah Mitchell was their only hope. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The story begins 3 years earlier, in the sterile corridors of the Pentagon, where age discrimination in the military was about to collide head-on with raw talent and determination. Sarah Mitchell had been flying military aircraft for over 25 years, accumulating more than 4,000 flight hours across multiple platforms, including the F-16 Fighting Falcon, F-18 Super Hornet, and A-10 Thunderbolt II. Her service record was impeccable. She had flown combat missions in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, earning the Distinguished Flying Cross twice and the Air Medal with 7 oak leaf clusters. But in the eyes of the F-35 Program Selection Committee, none of that mattered as much as the number on her birth certificate. The F-35 Lightning II program represented the pinnacle of modern aviation technology. This fifth-generation stealth fighter was designed to be the backbone of American air superiority for the next 40 years, featuring advanced stealth capabilities, sensor fusion, and network-centric warfare systems that made it the most sophisticated aircraft ever built. The program was highly selective, typically choosing pilots in their late 20s to early 30s who could serve for decades and maximize the military's investment in their extensive training. When Sarah first submitted her application for the F-35 program, she knew the odds were stacked against her. At 44, she was nearly a decade older than the typical candidate. The selection process was brutal, extensive psychological evaluations, rigorous physical fitness tests, and countless hours of simulator training on systems so advanced they seemed like science fiction. The F-35's helmet-mounted display system alone cost $400,000 and required pilots to learn an entirely new way of processing information, with data streaming directly to their field of vision in real-time. The rejection came on a Tuesday morning. In March 2019, the letter was polite but firm. While your service record is exemplary, the F-35 program requires pilots who can serve for extended periods to justify the significant training investment. We appreciate your interest and encourage you to consider other opportunities within the Air Force. Sarah crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash, but something inside her refused to accept defeat. That evening, she called her mentor, retired General Patricia Hawk Rodriguez, who had blazed trails for women in combat aviation during the 1990s. Sarah, the general said, they're not rejecting you because you're too old. They're rejecting you because they're afraid of what you represent: experience, wisdom, and the kind of judgment that only comes from years of actual combat. Don't let them define your worth by a number. The next morning, Sarah began what would become a year-long campaign to prove her point. She filed a formal appeal through military channels, but more importantly, she began demonstrating why experience mattered more than age in modern warfare. She volunteered for every challenging assignment, flew the most dangerous missions, and mentored younger pilots with a dedication that became legendary within her squadron. Her flight logs during this period read like a masterclass in tactical aviation. She flew 127 combat sorties, participated in joint exercises with NATO allies, and helped develop new tactics for close air support in urban environments. The turning point came during a joint training exercise with the Israeli Air Force in the summer of 2020. Sarah was flying an F-16 in a simulated combat scenario when two younger F-35 pilots found themselves in a tactical situation they couldn't resolve. The enemy forces had adapted to the F-35's capabilities, using electronic warfare techniques that confused the aircraft's advanced sensors. Sarah, flying the older but reliable F-16, used her experience to guide both F-35 pilots through the challenge, demonstrating the kind of tactical thinking that couldn't be programmed into software or learned from manuals. The Israeli pilots were impressed, but more importantly, so was Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Razor Thompson, the F-35 program's deputy director who was observing the exercise. He had heard about Sarah's appeal and had come to see for himself whether age was truly a barrier to F-35 effectiveness. What he witnessed changed his perspective entirely. She wasn't just flying the aircraft, he later wrote in his report. She was teaching two F-35 pilots how to think like fighter pilots instead of computer operators. Thompson's report landed on the desk of General Patricia Hayes, the Air Force's Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. General Hayes was no stranger to fighting institutional bias. She had been one of the first women to fly combat missions in the F-16 and understood the value of experience in warfare. She reviewed Sarah's file, her appeal, and Thompson's glowing report, then made a decision that would ripple through the entire F-35 program. "Get me Colonel Mitchell," she told her aide. "It's time we stopped confusing age with capability." The call came on a Friday afternoon in September 2020. Sarah was in the middle of a pre-flight inspection when her squadron commander approached with the news that would change everything. "Sarah, you need to call General Hayes immediately. Something about the F-35 program." As Sarah dialed the number, her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the possibility that her year of fighting might finally pay off. The conversation was brief but life-changing. General Hayes explained that the F-35 program was being modified to include a limited number of experienced pilots who could serve as tactical advisors and mentors. Sarah would be among the first, but she would need to prove herself all over again. The F-35 training program at Eglin Air Force Base was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her 25-year career. The aircraft itself was a marvel of engineering, a single-engine, stealth multi-role fighter that could perform air-to-air combat, air-to-ground strikes, and intelligence gathering with equal effectiveness. But learning to fly, it was like learning to speak an entirely new language while simultaneously solving complex mathematical equations in your head. Sarah's first day at Eglin was met with skeptical glances from the other trainees, most of whom were young enough to be her children. Captain Jake "Viper" Morrison, a 29-year-old hotshot from the F-16 program, made no effort to hide his disdain. "No disrespect, ma'am," he said during their first briefing, "but this isn't your grandfather's fighter jet. The F-35 requires reflexes and cognitive processing speed that, well, let's just say it favors younger pilots." Sarah smiled politely and said nothing, but inside she was already planning how to prove him wrong. The F-35 systems were indeed revolutionary. The distributed aperture system provided 360-degree situational awareness. The advanced targeting pod could track multiple targets simultaneously, and the helmet-mounted display overlaid critical information directly onto the pilot's field of vision. But all of this technology meant nothing without the tactical knowledge to use it effectively. The training program was divided into 3 phases: academics, simulator training, and actual flight training. The academics covered everything from stealth technology principles to advanced electronic warfare tactics. Sarah threw herself into the coursework with the dedication of a graduate student, often staying up until 2 a.m. studying technical manuals and memorizing system parameters. Her instructors were impressed by her thoroughness, but some questioned whether she could translate book knowledge into the split-second decisions required in aerial combat. The simulator phase was where Sarah began to demonstrate her true value. The F-35 simulator was a $15 million marvel that could replicate any combat scenario with startling realism. During one particularly challenging exercise, the trainees were tasked with penetrating heavily defended airspace to strike a high-value target. The younger pilots, relying primarily on the aircraft's stealth capabilities and advanced systems, found themselves overwhelmed when the simulated enemy employed advanced radar systems and electronic countermeasures. Sarah took a different approach. Instead of relying solely on the F-35's technology, she used her decades of tactical experience to plot an unconventional route that exploited terrain features and enemy radar blind spots. She completed the mission in 12 minutes 4 minutes, faster than any other trainee. More importantly, she did it without triggering a single enemy radar system, something the younger pilots had been unable to achieve despite the F-35's advanced stealth capabilities. Lieutenant Colonel David Torch Williams, the chief instructor, pulled Sarah aside after the exercise. "Colonel Mitchell, that was textbook tactical flying. Where did you learn to read terrain like that?" "Afghanistan, sir," Sarah replied. "When you're flying close air support missions in mountainous terrain, with surface-to-air missiles hunting you, you learn to use every rock and ridge to your advantage. The F-35 stealth is incredible, but it's not magic. Experience still matters." Word of Sarah's simulator performance spread quickly through the program. The younger pilots began seeking her advice, and even Captain Morrison found himself asking questions about tactical decision-making. Sarah was generous with her knowledge, conducting informal briefings in the evenings where she shared lessons learned from her combat experiences. She explained how enemy forces adapted to new technology, how terrain could be either an ally or enemy depending on how you used it, and most importantly, how to think 3 moves ahead in aerial combat. The real test came during the actual flight. Training phase. Sarah's first flight in the F-35 was a revelation. The aircraft responded to her inputs with precision and power that exceeded even her highest expectations. The helmet-mounted display system, which many pilots found overwhelming at first, seemed intuitive to her, perhaps because her years of experience had taught her to process multiple streams of information simultaneously. But it was during a complex air-to-air combat exercise that Sarah truly proved her worth. The scenario pitted 4 F-35 trainees against 6 F-16 aggressor squadron pilots, experienced aviators whose job was to simulate enemy aircraft and tactics. The exercise was designed to be challenging, with the F-35's advanced capabilities theoretically giving them an advantage despite being outnumbered. The engagement began at 25,000 feet over the Gulf of Mexico. The F-16 aggressors, flying in a complex defensive formation, immediately began employing electronic warfare tactics designed to confuse the F-35 sensors. 3 of the trainee pilots, including Captain Morrison, found themselves overwhelmed by the information flooding their displays. Within minutes, 2 of them had been shot down by the simulated enemy missiles. Sarah, flying as flight lead, quickly assessed the situation and made a decision that surprised everyone monitoring the exercise. Instead of engaging the F-16s directly, she led her remaining wingmen on a wide flanking maneuver that took them temporarily out of the fight. The move seemed counterintuitive. The F-35s were losing the battle, and Sarah was retreating even further from the enemy. But Sarah wasn't retreating. She was repositioning. Using her knowledge of aerial tactics and the F-35's advanced sensors, she had identified a weakness in the enemy formation. The F-16s were maintaining radio silence and using hand signals to coordinate their attacks, a tactic that worked well against conventional aircraft, but created a blind spot that the F-35's sophisticated electronic warfare systems could exploit. Sarah positioned herself and her wingmen to take advantage of this weakness. Using the F-35's advanced radar and data link capabilities, she painted all 6 enemy aircraft, simultaneously and coordinated a precision strike that destroyed 4 of them in a matter of seconds. The remaining 2 F-16s, suddenly finding themselves outnumbered and outpositioned, were quickly eliminated by Sarah's tactical maneuvering. The exercise controllers were stunned. Never before had F-35 trainees achieved such a decisive victory against the experienced aggressor squadron. Colonel Sarah Mitchell had not only demonstrated mastery of the F-35 systems, but had shown how experience and technology could be combined to achieve unprecedented tactical success. After the flight, the aggressor squadron commander, Colonel Rick Bandit Stevens, approached Sarah with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. "Colonel Mitchell, in 15 years of flying against trainee pilots, I've never seen anything like that. How did you know we were using hand signals?" Sarah smiled. "Experience, Colonel. In combat, you learn to read the subtle signs that reveal enemy tactics. The F-35's technology is incredible, but it's most effective when combined with the kind of tactical thinking that only comes from years of real-world experience." Sarah's graduation from the F-35 program came with fanfare she hadn't expected. Not only had she finished first in her class, but she had also been selected for a special assignment that would put her unconventional background to the test. The assignment was classified, but her commanding officer, General Patricia Hayes, provided enough details to convey its importance. "Sarah, we're creating a new squadron, the 421st Tactical Fighter Squadron. It's going to be based in Germany, and its mission will be to serve as a rapid response unit for NATO operations in Eastern Europe. The geopolitical situation is getting more complex, and we need pilots who can think strategically while flying the most advanced aircraft in the world." The 421st Squadron was established at Spangdahlem Air Base in Germany in the spring of 2021. Sarah was assigned as the deputy squadron commander, a position that required her to balance administrative duties with combat readiness. The squadron's mission was unique. They were to serve as the tip of the spear for NATO operations, capable of responding to threats anywhere in Europe within hours. Sarah's reputation had preceded her to Germany. The younger pilots in the squadron, many of whom were fresh from their own F-35 training, looked up to her as a legend. Her simulator performance and tactical innovations had become part of F-35 training folklore. But Sarah knew that reputation meant nothing if she couldn't perform when it mattered most. The squadron's first major test came during a joint exercise with Polish and Baltic NATO allies in the summer of 2021. The exercise, codenamed Baltic Guardian, was designed to simulate a response to aggressive actions by a hostile nation. Sarah was chosen to lead a flight of 4 F-35s in a complex air superiority mission over the Baltic Sea. The scenario was challenging. Hostile aircraft were reportedly operating in international airspace, conducting provocative flights near NATO borders. The F-35's mission was to intercept and escort these aircraft while demonstrating NATO's resolve without escalating tensions. It was exactly the kind of delicate operation that required both advanced technology and seasoned judgment. Sarah's flight launched from Spangdahlem at 0600 hours on a crisp July morning. The F-35s climbed quickly to their cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, their stealth signatures making them virtually invisible to enemy radar systems. As they approached the Baltic region, Sarah's sensors began detecting multiple aircraft contacts, more than the intelligence briefing had indicated. "Phoenix lead, this is Baltic Control," came the voice of the NATO air traffic controller. "We're showing 12 hostile aircraft in your patrol area, not the 6 we briefed. Rules of engagement remain the same: visual identification only. No aggressive actions unless fired upon." Sarah's tactical mind immediately began processing the implications. 12 aircraft suggested a much more serious probe than intelligence had anticipated. The enemy was testing NATO's response capabilities, and how her flight handled the situation could have strategic implications far beyond the immediate tactical encounter. Baltic Control, Phoenix lead copies. We're proceeding to intercept. Sarah. Switch to her flight frequency. Phoenix flight, this is lead. We've got a more complex situation than briefed. Stay tight, follow my lead, and remember, we're representing more than just ourselves up here. The intercept began at 0645 hours. Sarah's F-35 approached the first group of hostile aircraft, 4 advanced fighters flying in a tight formation. The enemy pilots were skilled, immediately recognizing the F-35's approach and adjusting their formation to maintain international airspace boundaries, while continuing their provocative flight pattern. What happened next demonstrated why Sarah's experience was invaluable. The enemy aircraft began employing electronic warfare tactics designed to confuse the F-35's systems. Younger pilots might have been overwhelmed by the sensor interference, but Sarah had encountered similar tactics in combat zones. She quickly identified the electronic warfare patterns and adjusted her flight's approach accordingly. Phoenix 2, take the left flank. Phoenix 3 and 4, stay high and maintain sensor coverage. They're trying to mask additional aircraft behind electronic interference. Sarah's prediction proved accurate. As her flight maneuvered to counter the first group of aircraft, her sensors detected 4 additional contacts emerging from behind the electronic warfare screen. The enemy had attempted to use the initial aircraft as a distraction while positioning additional fighters for a more aggressive probe. The tactical situation became increasingly complex as more hostile aircraft appeared. Sarah found herself commanding not just her 4-aircraft flight, but coordinating with Polish F-16s and German Eurofighter Typhoons that had been scrambled to assist. The multinational force represented a significant test of NATO's integrated air defense systems. Sarah's role evolved from flight leader to tactical commander, as she used the F-35's advanced communication systems to coordinate the Allied response. Her experience in joint operations proved invaluable as she seamlessly integrated American, Polish, and German aircraft into a unified defensive formation. Baltic Control Phoenix lead. We have positive identification on 16 hostile aircraft in 4 separate groups. Recommend we demonstrate coordinated NATO response while maintaining defensive posture. The demonstration was impressive. Sarah orchestrated a complex aerial ballet that involved 24 NATO aircraft from 3 different nations, all responding to her tactical guidance. The F-35's advanced sensors provided unprecedented situational awareness, while Sarah's experience ensured that the Allied aircraft operated as a unified force rather than individual national contingents. The hostile aircraft, faced with a coordinated NATO response that clearly demonstrated both technological superiority and tactical expertise, gradually withdrew from the area. The entire encounter lasted less than 2 hours, but its implications were significant. NATO had demonstrated that it could respond rapidly and effectively to aerial provocations, with the F-35s serving as the backbone of a multinational defensive network. After the mission, Sarah received commendations from all 3 NATO air forces involved in the operation. But more importantly, she had proven that the F-35 program's decision to include experienced pilots was strategically sound. The aircraft's advanced technology was most effective when operated by pilots who understood the broader implications of their actions. The success of Baltic Guardian established Sarah as one of the F-35 program's most valuable assets. Her combination of tactical expertise and strategic thinking made her the ideal pilot for the complex multinational operations that were becoming increasingly common in the modern security environment. But the greatest test of her abilities was still to come. The intelligence briefing on the morning of September 15, 2022, carried an unusual level of tension. Sarah sat in the secure briefing room at Spangdahlem Air Base, surrounded by pilots from multiple NATO nations, as classified satellite imagery flashed across the large screen. The situation in Eastern Europe had deteriorated rapidly over the past 72 hours, and what had begun as routine monitoring flights was about to become something far more dangerous. "Ladies and gentlemen," began Colonel Marcus Razor Thompson, now serving as NATO's Joint Air Operations Director, "we have a developing situation that requires immediate attention. Intelligence indicates that hostile forces have established advanced surface-to-air missile systems in disputed territory, creating a no-fly zone that threatens commercial aviation routes and NATO patrol flights. The satellite images showed a sophisticated air defense network, A-21 Growler systems, SF-15 Gauntlet mobile units, and what appeared to be newer, more advanced systems that intelligence analysts were still trying to identify. The missile umbrella covered nearly 200 square miles of airspace, effectively creating a death trap for any aircraft that entered without proper countermeasures. "The immediate concern," Thompson continued, "is a NATO training exercise that's already in progress. 30 pilots from 6 different nations are currently conducting air-to-air combat training approximately 150 miles from the missile threat zone. The exercise was planned months ago, and the pilots are flying a variety of aircraft F-16s, F-18s, Eurofighter Typhoons, and French Rafales." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she studied the tactical display. The training exercise, codenamed Allied Sword, had placed 30 NATO pilots in a vulnerable position. Their aircraft were not equipped with the advanced electronic warfare systems needed to penetrate the hostile air defense network, and their current flight patterns would bring them dangerously close to the missile threat zone within hours. "What's the extraction plan?" asked Captain Morrison, who had become one of Sarah's most trusted squadron members since their days in training together. Thompson's expression grew grim. "That's the problem. The hostile forces began jamming communications 40 minutes ago. We've lost contact with the exercise controllers, and the pilots are operating under radio silence protocols. They have no idea they're flying into a death trap." The briefing room fell silent as the implications sank in. 30 NATO pilots, flying aircraft worth hundreds of millions of dollars, were heading toward one of the most sophisticated air defense networks ever deployed. Without warning, without support, and without the advanced systems needed to survive in that environment. "Sir," Sarah said, raising her hand, "what are the rules of engagement? Are we authorized to enter the threat zone to warn the exercise pilots?" Thompson paused, clearly weighing his words carefully. "Colonel Mitchell, the political situation is extremely delicate. Any NATO military action in the disputed territory could be interpreted as an act of aggression. However, we cannot allow 30 Allied pilots to be shot down without warning. The decision has been made at the highest levels. We need a reconnaissance mission to assess the threat and attempt to contact the exercise pilots." Sarah knew immediately what he was going to say next. The F-35 was the only aircraft in NATO's inventory capable of penetrating the hostile air defense network undetected. Its stealth capabilities, advanced electronic warfare systems, and sophisticated sensors made it the perfect platform for this type of mission. But it was also incredibly dangerous. Even the F-35 stealth technology had limitations, and the hostile forces had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded NATO's intelligence estimates. "Colonel Mitchell," Thompson said, "your squadron has been selected to conduct this reconnaissance mission. The 421st Squadron's F-35s are the only aircraft capable of penetrating the threat zone and maintaining communications with the exercise pilots. Your mission is to locate the 30 NATO aircraft, warn them of the threat, and guide them to safety." Sarah's mind immediately began processing the tactical challenges. The F-35s would need to enter hostile airspace, locate 30 aircraft spread across a vast area, establish communications despite electronic jamming, and then coordinate a complex extraction while avoiding one of the most sophisticated air defense networks in the world. It was exactly the kind of mission that required both advanced technology and experienced judgment. "Sir, how many F-35s are we talking about?" she asked. "4 aircraft, Colonel. Phoenix Flight, your standard formation. The mission launches in 2 hours." As the briefing concluded, Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. 4 F-35s against an advanced air defense network, with 30 NATO pilots depending on them for survival. The younger pilots in her squadron looked to her for guidance, and she could see both confidence and concern in their eyes. Captain Morrison approached her after the briefing. "Colonel, this is going to be the most dangerous mission any of us have ever flown. The SA-21 systems alone have a range of over 200 miles, and intelligence suggests they have additional systems we haven't identified yet." Sarah nodded grimly. "Jake, I won't lie to you, this mission has a high probability of combat. But those 30 pilots out there are depending on us, and we're the only ones who can reach them. The F-35 gives us capabilities that no other aircraft has, but success will depend on how we use those capabilities." Over the next hour, Sarah and her flight conducted intensive mission planning. They studied the hostile air defense network, analyzed the last known positions of the exercise aircraft, and developed multiple contingency plans for different scenarios. The mission would require precision timing, perfect coordination, and the kind of tactical thinking that could only come from years of combat experience. The pre-flight briefing was tense but focused. Sarah's 3 wingmen, Captain Morrison, Lieutenant Colonel Anna Viper Kowalski from the Polish Air Force, and Major Hans Egelmüller from the German Air Force, were all experienced pilots who understood the stakes. The international composition of the flight was intentional. If the mission succeeded, it would demonstrate NATO's integrated capabilities. If it failed, the political consequences would be severe. "Listen up," Sarah said as they gathered around. "The tactical display. We're going to enter hostile airspace at 0300 hours, flying at maximum stealth configuration. Our primary objective is to locate and warn the exercise pilots. Secondary objective is to guide them to safety. We do not engage hostile forces unless absolutely necessary, but we are authorized to defend ourselves and the exercise pilots." The flight plan was complex, requiring the F-35s to approach the threat zone from multiple directions to maximize their sensor coverage while minimizing their exposure to hostile radar systems. Sarah would lead the formation, using her experience to navigate the electronic warfare environment, while her wingmen provided tactical support and communications relay as they prepared for takeoff. Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 18 months earlier, she had been told she was too old for the F-35 program. Now she was leading the most critical mission in NATO's recent history. With the lives of 30 pilots depending on her experience and judgment, the F-35s launched into the pre-dawn darkness at 0245 hours, their stealth signatures making them invisible to hostile radar systems. As they climbed toward their cruising altitude, Sarah opened the secure communications channel to her flight. "Phoenix Flight, this is lead. We're approaching the point of no return. From here on out, we're committed to the mission. Stay sharp. Follow procedures, and remember 30 pilots are counting on us to bring them home." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The F-35s crossed into hostile airspace at 0315 hours, their advanced stealth systems rendering them virtually invisible to enemy radar. Sarah's heads-up display showed a complex web of threat indicators as the aircraft's sensors detected the sophisticated air defense network below. The SA-21 Growler systems were actively scanning, their radar beams sweeping the sky in search of intruders, while mobile SA-15 units provided overlapping coverage that created a deadly maze of surface-to-air missiles. "Phoenix lead, this is 2. came Captain Morrison's voice over the encrypted communications system. "I'm showing at least 16 separate radar emitters, including some signatures that don't match anything in our threat database." Sarah's tactical display confirmed Morrison's assessment. The hostile forces had deployed systems that NATO intelligence had underestimated, including what appeared to be advanced electronic warfare platforms designed specifically to counter stealth aircraft. The enemy had learned from previous encounters and adapted their tactics accordingly. Copy 2. Stay in stealth configuration and maintain radio discipline. We're looking for 30 needles in a very dangerous haystack. The search for the exercise pilots was complicated by the electronic jamming that had severed communications with the training exercise. Sarah's F-35 used its advanced sensors to scan the airspace systematically, looking for the distinctive radar signatures of friendly aircraft. The F-16s, F-18s, Eurofighter Typhoons, and French Rafales each had unique electronic signatures that the F-35's computers could identify. But the jamming made detection difficult and unreliable. 20 minutes into the mission, Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski made the first contact. "Phoenix lead, this is 3. I have multiple contacts bearing 090, approximately 100 miles from the threat zone. Signature analysis suggests 4 F-16s flying in formation." Sarah's heart rate increased as she processed the information. The F-16s were flying directly toward the SA-21 missile umbrella, completely unaware of the danger that awaited them. At their current speed and heading, they would enter the lethal engagement zone within 30 minutes. "Phoenix 3, can you establish communications with the F-16s? "Negative lead. The jamming is too intense. I can see them on sensors, but I can't talk to them." Sarah made a quick tactical decision. "Phoenix flight, we're going to have to break stealth to warn them." 3. Move to intercept the F-16s. Use visual signals if necessary, flasher navigation. Lights, perform aggressive maneuvers, anything to get their attention. Breaking stealth was incredibly dangerous. The moment the F-35s revealed themselves, the hostile air defense systems would detect them and begin targeting calculations. But Sarah knew that saving the F-16 pilots was worth the risk. Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski's F-35 accelerated toward the unsuspecting F-16s, deliberately increasing her radar signature to make herself visible. The Polish pilot was taking enormous personal risk to warn her fellow NATO aviators, demonstrating the kind of courage that defined the alliance. "Phoenix lead, this is 3. I have visual contact with the F-16s. They're American aircraft tail. Numbers suggest they're from the 52nd Fighter Wing. I'm attempting to establish communications." Sarah watched her tactical display as Kowalski's F-35 approached the F-16 formation. The moment of truth came when the F-16 flight leader finally noticed the stealth fighter and began responding to Kowalski's visual signals. The American pilots. Confusion was evident as he tried to understand why an unscheduled F-35 was intercepting his training flight. "Phoenix lead, this is 3. I've established contact with the F-16s. They're responding to my signals and beginning to turn away from the threat zone." But Sarah's relief was short-lived. The hostile air defense systems had detected Kowalski's F-35 the moment she broke stealth, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah's threat warning system exploded with alerts as multiple SA-21 systems locked onto the Polish pilot's aircraft. "Phoenix 3, you're being painted by multiple SAM systems. Take evasive action immediately." The next 60 seconds were a masterclass in modern aerial combat. Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski, flying one of the most advanced aircraft in the world, found herself in a deadly game of cat and mouse with surface-to-air missiles that had been specifically designed to counter stealth technology. The F-35's electronic warfare systems went into overdrive, attempting to confuse the incoming missiles while Kowalski performed evasive maneuvers that pushed both aircraft and pilot to their limits. Sarah made another split-second decision that would define the mission's outcome. Phoenix flight. All aircraft break stealth and engage electronic warfare systems. We're going to create multiple targets to confuse the SAM systems. It was a calculated risk that multiplied the danger for all 4 F-35s, but gave them the best chance of survival. The moment all 4 aircraft revealed themselves, the hostile air defense network went into full alert mode. Dozens of surface-to-air missiles began launching from their mobile platforms, creating a complex three-dimensional battlefield that stretched across hundreds of square miles. "Phoenix lead, this is Eagle," came Major Muller's voice, tight with concentration. "I'm tracking 8. Number 12 inbound missiles. The SAM systems are using coordinated targeting. They're trying to overwhelm our defensive systems." Sarah's tactical mind processed the information rapidly. The hostile forces were employing sophisticated tactics that demonstrated advanced training and equipment. They weren't just shooting missiles randomly. They were using coordinated salvos designed to defeat the F-35's defensive capabilities. "Phoenix. Flight. Implement defensive pattern Delta. We're going to use our mobility and electronic warfare systems to create a defensive screen for the exercise pilots." Defensive pattern Delta was a complex tactical maneuver that required all 4 F-35s to coordinate their movements and electronic warfare systems to create overlapping fields of protection. It was extremely difficult to execute under ideal conditions, and nearly impossible while being targeted by multiple missile systems. But Sarah's flight performed the maneuver flawlessly. The 4 F-35s spread out across the airspace, each aircraft using its advanced sensors and electronic warfare capabilities to track and confuse incoming missiles. The stealth fighters' computers shared targeting data in real time, creating a unified defensive network that was greater than the sum of its parts. As the first wave of missiles approached, Sarah's aircraft began deploying countermeasures: chaff, flares, and advanced electronic decoys that confused the incoming warheads. The F-35's sophisticated defensive systems worked in coordination with the pilot's tactical decisions, creating a deadly dance of technology and human skill. "Phoenix 2, missile in the air. S-21 inbound from your 6 o'clock. Captain Morrison's." F-35 rolled into a steep dive, using a combination of chaff and electronic jamming to defeat the incoming missile. The SA-21 warhead, confused by the countermeasures, detonated harmlessly 500 feet away from the stealth fighter. But even as the first wave of missiles was defeated, Sarah's sensors detected something far more dangerous. The hostile forces were launching a second wave of missiles, but these were different advanced systems that her aircraft's computers didn't recognize. "Phoenix flight. We have unknown missile types inbound. These aren't in our threat database." Sarah realized they were facing weapons that NATO had never encountered before, systems that might be specifically designed to defeat the F-35's defensive capabilities. The mission had just become exponentially more dangerous, the unknown missiles streaking toward. Sarah's formation represented a nightmare scenario that NATO planners had long feared: advanced weapon systems that could potentially neutralize the F-35's technological advantages. Sarah's threat warning system was unable to provide detailed information about the incoming missiles, forcing her to rely on basic evasive tactics and the hard-won experience of 25 years in combat aviation. "Phoenix flight, these unknown missiles are tracking differently than standard SAMs," she announced over the formation frequency. "They're not following predictable flight paths. I think they're using artificial intelligence guidance systems." The implications were staggering. If the hostile forces had developed AI-guided missiles specifically designed to counter stealth aircraft, the entire strategic balance of modern warfare could be shifting in real time. Sarah's mission had evolved from a rescue operation to a critical intelligence gathering effort that could affect NATO's future tactical doctrine. Phoenix lead, this is 4, came Major Muller's voice, strained with the effort of high-G maneuvering. I'm tracking multiple unknown missiles, and they're adapting to our countermeasures. Every time I deploy chaff, they adjust their targeting. Algorithms. Sarah's mind raced through the tactical implications. Traditional surface-to-air missiles relied on relatively simple guidance systems that could be defeated by established countermeasures. But AI-guided weapons could learn from each engagement, adapting their tactics in real time to overcome defensive systems. Phoenix flight, we're going to have to get creative. Standard defensive patterns won't work against adaptive weapons. Follow my lead and improvise based on the missile behavior. What followed was perhaps the most innovative aerial combat sequence in modern military history. Sarah began using the F-35's advanced flight characteristics in ways that pushed the aircraft beyond its normal operational parameters. She performed a series of radical maneuvers that combined elements of aerobatic flying with combat tactics, creating flight patterns that were too unpredictable for even AI guidance systems to track effectively. The other F-35 pilots, following Sarah's lead, began implementing their own innovative defensive techniques. Captain Morrison used his aircraft's thrust vectoring capabilities to perform a maneuver that aerospace engineers would later describe as aerodynamically impossible, while Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski employed a combination of electronic warfare and extreme altitude changes that confused the AI missile's target acquisition systems. But even as they successfully defeated the advanced missiles, Sarah's sensors detected an even more serious threat. The hostile forces had scrambled fighter aircraft advanced interceptors that were now climbing rapidly toward the F-35's altitude. The stealth fighters, already engaged in complex defensive maneuvers against surface-to-air missiles, would now have to contend with airborne threats as well. Phoenix lead, this is 2, I'm showing 6. No, 8 hostile fighters climbing through 20,000 feet. They're vectoring directly toward our position. Sarah's tactical display showed the approaching fighters as red symbols moving rapidly across the screen. The enemy aircraft were advanced interceptors, probably equipped with long-range air-to-air missiles and sophisticated radar systems. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly complex for F-35s. We're now facing threats from both ground-based missiles and airborne fighters, while simultaneously trying to protect 30 NATO exercise pilots. Phoenix flight, we're going to have to engage the hostile fighters. The exercise pilots are still in danger, and we can't complete the rescue mission with enemy interceptors hunting us. The decision to engage marked a significant escalation in the mission. Sarah was authorizing the first air-to-air combat involving F-35s in a contested environment, and the outcome would have strategic implications far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Phoenix lead, this is 3, came Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski's voice. I have radar lock on the lead hostile fighter. Request permission to engage. Sarah evaluated the tactical situation rapidly. The hostile fighters were closing on the F-35's position, and their intentions were clearly aggressive. The rules of engagement authorized defensive action, and the safety of the exercise pilots demanded decisive response. Phoenix flight, you are cleared to engage. Take down the hostile fighters, but conserve ammunition for the surface-to-air threats. The air-to-air engagement began at 0347 hours, with Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski firing the first shot, her IM-120D. Advanced medium-range air-to-air missile streaked toward the lead hostile fighter, its advanced guidance system locking onto the target despite the electronic warfare environment. The hostile pilot, clearly experienced, began implementing evasive maneuvers while deploying countermeasures. But the AIM-120D's advanced seeker head was designed to defeat such tactics, and the missile found its target with devastating effectiveness. The lead hostile fighter disintegrated in a brilliant flash of light, its debris scattered across the sky. Phoenix 3/1, Kowalski reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline of combat, but the remaining hostile fighters were not deterred. They continued their aggressive approach, launching their own missiles at the F-35s. Sarah's formation found itself engaged in a complex, three-dimensional battle that stretched across multiple altitude levels and involved both air-to-air and surface-to-air threats simultaneously. Phoenix lead, multiple missiles inbound from the hostile fighters. I'm counting at least 6 air-to-air missiles plus the continuing SAM threat. The tactical situation had become extraordinarily complex. Sarah's formation was simultaneously engaged with airborne fighters and ground-based missile systems while trying to protect 30 NATO exercise pilots. It was exactly the kind of multi-dimensional combat scenario that military planners had theorized about but never actually experienced. Sarah's response demonstrated why experience mattered more than age in aerial combat. Instead of becoming overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation, she began coordinating her formation's response with the calm precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. Each F-35 was assigned specific responsibilities. Captain Morrison focused on the airborne threats. Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski continued engaging the hostile fighters. Major Mueller provided electronic warfare support, and Sarah herself coordinated the overall tactical response. Phoenix Flight, implement combat spread formation. We're going to use our networking capabilities to create a coordinated defensive system. The F-35's advanced data link systems allowed them to share sensor information in real time, creating a unified picture of the battlefield that was far more comprehensive than any single aircraft could achieve. Sarah's formation began operating as a single integrated combat system, with each aircraft contributing its unique capabilities to the overall mission. The battle continued for another 20 minutes, with Sarah's formation successfully defeating multiple waves of both air-to-air and surface-to-air threats. But the most critical phase of the mission was still ahead. They had to locate and rescue the remaining exercise pilots while continuing to fight off hostile forces. The electronic warfare environment had become so intense that Sarah's F-35 was operating at the very limits of its capabilities. The hostile forces had deployed jamming systems that created a cacophony of electronic noise, making it nearly impossible to maintain communications with the scattered NATO exercise pilots. Yet somehow, through the chaos of combat and electronic interference, Sarah's sensors detected additional aircraft signatures. More exercise pilots who were flying directly into the expanding combat zone. Phoenix lead, this is 4, came Major Muller's voice, barely audible through the static. I'm detecting 12 additional aircraft bearing 270. They appear to be the French Rafale squadron from Exercise Allied Sword. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the full scope of the crisis. The 12 French pilots were flying advanced Dassault Rafale fighters, but even these sophisticated aircraft were no match for the AI-guided missiles and coordinated air defense systems they were about to encounter. Without warning, they would fly directly into a kill zone that had already claimed 1 hostile fighter and was actively engaging 4 F-35s. Phoenix Flight, we have to reach those Rafales before they enter the threat zone, Sarah announced, her voice cutting through the electronic static. 4, can you break off and intercept? Negative lead, Mueller replied. I'm currently engaged with 2 hostile fighters and multiple SAM systems. If I break off now, they'll have a clear shot at Phoenix 2. Sarah quickly assessed the tactical situation. Her formation was fully committed to the current engagement, with each F-35 playing a critical role in the coordinated defense. But the French pilots were flying into certain death unless someone warned them immediately. The decision she made next would define not only the mission's outcome, but also her legacy as a combat pilot. Phoenix Flight, this is lead. I'm breaking off to intercept the Rafales, continue current engagement, and cover my withdrawal. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. Colonel, that's suicide. You can't take on the entire air defense network alone. Sarah was already turning her F-35 toward the French formation, pushing the aircraft to maximum speed while maintaining minimal radar signature. Jake, sometimes experience means knowing when to take calculated risks. Those pilots need someone who can think 3 moves ahead. What Sarah attempted next was tactically brilliant but incredibly dangerous. Instead of flying directly toward the French Rafales, she began a complex approach that would take her through the heart of the hostile air defense network. Her plan was to use the F-35 stealth capabilities and advanced electronic warfare systems to create a corridor of confusion that would allow her to reach the French pilots while simultaneously disrupting the enemy's targeting systems. The maneuver required split-second timing and perfect understanding of how radar systems worked. Sarah flew her F-35 through the gaps between overlapping radar coverage zones, using terrain features and electronic countermeasures to mask her approach. She was essentially playing 3-dimensional chess at 500 miles per hour while hostile forces tried to kill her. Phoenix lead, this is Baltic Control, came an urgent transmission from the NATO command center. We're tracking your approach to the French formation. Be advised, intelligence indicates the hostile forces have deployed additional air defense systems in your path. Sarah's threat warning system confirmed Baltic Control's assessment. New radar emitters were coming online, creating an even more complex web of surface-to-air missile coverage. The enemy was adapting to the NATO response, deploying additional systems to counter the F-35's capabilities. Baltic Control, Phoenix lead copies. I'm committed to the intercept. Tell the French pilots to watch for visual signals. As Sarah approached the French formation, she began implementing a communication technique she had learned during joint exercises years earlier. Unable to reach the Rafale pilots by radio due to jamming, she would have to use a combination of flight maneuvers and visual signals to convey the danger they were flying into. The first challenge was getting the French pilots' attention without triggering their defensive responses. The Rafale pilots focused on their training exercise might interpret an unscheduled F-35 intercept as part of the exercise scenario. Sarah needed to communicate urgency without creating confusion that could lead to friendly fire incidents. Sarah's F-35 appeared alongside the lead Rafale at 0412 hours, materializing out of the electronic haze like a ghost. The French pilot's surprise was evident as he suddenly found himself in formation with an aircraft that shouldn't have been there. Sarah began a series of hand signals and aircraft movements that international pilots used to communicate when radio contact was impossible. The French flight leader, Captain Philippe Mistral Dubois, was an experienced pilot who immediately recognized that something was seriously wrong. Sarah's urgent signals and the F-35's aggressive maneuvering clearly indicated an emergency situation. Within seconds, Dubois was transmitting on emergency frequencies, trying to understand what was happening. Unknown F-35, this is French flight leader. We cannot establish radio contact. Please clarify your intentions. Sarah couldn't hear Dubois's transmission due to the jamming, but she could see the French pilot's confusion and concern. She began implementing more dramatic visual signals, using her aircraft's position relative to the Rafales to indicate direction and urgency. The message was clear: immediate danger. Turn away from current heading. The breakthrough came when Captain Dubois noticed Sarah's F-35 displaying active threat warning indicators. The stealth fighter's external warning lights were flashing, indicating that it was being actively targeted by hostile radar systems. The French pilot immediately understood that they were flying into a combat zone. Dubois began transmitting on all frequencies, using both French and English emergency codes to alert his formation. All Mistral aircraft, emergency turn starboard. We are approaching hostile forces. Repeat, emergency turn starboard immediately. But even as the French pilots began responding to the warning, Sarah's sensors detected a new and more serious threat. The hostile forces had identified the French formation and were preparing to engage with long-range surface-to-air missiles. The SA-21 systems were already calculating firing solutions, and Sarah realized that even with the warning, the Rafales might not be able to escape the missile engagement zone in time. Sarah made another, split-second decision that demonstrated why experience was more valuable than youth in combat aviation. Instead of simply warning the French pilots, she was going to provide active protection by engaging the hostile missile systems before they could fire. Phoenix Flight, this is lead. I'm engaging the SAM sites that are targeting the French formation. Continue your current mission. Sarah's F-35 turned toward the A-21 missile battery that posed the greatest threat to the Rafales. She was about to attempt something that had never been done before, a single stealth fighter attacking a sophisticated air defense system while protecting friendly aircraft that were not equipped for the electronic warfare environment. The A-21 system detected Sarah's approach and began targeting calculations, but the F-35 stealth capabilities and electronic warfare systems created enough confusion to prevent an immediate missile launch. Sarah used this brief window to position herself for an attack that would neutralize the threat to the French pilots. What happened next would be studied in military academies for decades to come. Sarah's attack on the SA-21 missile system required her to fly directly into the most heavily defended airspace in the region. The surface-to-air missile battery was protected by multiple layers of shorter-range systems, creating a deadly gauntlet that would challenge even the F-35's advanced capabilities. But Sarah had identified a critical weakness in the enemy's defensive posture, a gap in radar coverage that would allow her to approach the SA-21 system from an unexpected angle. The approach required Sarah to fly at extremely low altitude, using terrain masking to avoid detection by the overlapping radar systems. Her F-35 skimmed across the landscape at 200 feet above ground level, traveling at over 400 miles per hour through valleys and mountain passes that provided natural camouflage from enemy sensors. Phoenix lead, this is 3, came Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski's voice through the static. We're tracking multiple missile launches from your target area. The SA-21 system is going active. Sarah's threat warning system exploded with alerts as the hostile air defense network detected her approach and began coordinating a response. Multiple missile systems were locking onto her aircraft simultaneously, creating a targeting scenario that pushed the F-35's defensive capabilities to their absolute limits. Copy 3. The SA-21 is launching on the French formation. I have to take it out before those missiles reach the Rafales. The tactical situation had become a race against time. Long-range SA-21 missiles were already in the air, flying toward the French Rafale formation at 3 times the speed of sound. Sarah had perhaps 90 seconds to neutralize the missile battery before the incoming weapons reached their targets. Sarah's F-35 emerged from the terrain masking at 0418 hours, appearing less than 5 miles from the SA-21 launcher. At this range, stealth technology provided minimal protection. The missile system's radar was powerful enough to detect even the F-35's reduced signature. Sarah's aircraft immediately became the focus of intense defensive fire from multiple short-range missile systems protecting the SA-21 battery. Multiple threats, SA-15s and SA-19s engaging. Sarah announced as her aircraft began automatic defensive maneuvers. The F-35's computer systems took partial control of the aircraft, implementing evasive patterns while Sarah focused on targeting the SA-21 launcher. The scene around Sarah's aircraft was like something from a science fiction movie. Dozens of surface-to-air missiles were streaking through the sky, their exhaust trails creating a deadly web of fire and smoke. The F-35's electronic warfare systems were operating at maximum power, sending out signals designed to confuse and redirect the incoming missiles. Sarah locked onto the SA-21 launcher and fired two AGM-88E advanced anti-radiation missiles, weapons specifically designed to home in on radar emissions and destroy air defense systems. The missiles streaked toward their target at Mach 2, their advanced seekers cutting through the electronic warfare environment to find the SA-21's distinctive radar signature. But the hostile forces had prepared for this type of attack. The moment Sarah's missiles were detected, the SA-21 system shut down its radar and began relocating to a backup position. The anti-radiation missiles, deprived of their target signal, began searching for alternative radar sources. Negative impact on primary target, Sarah reported, her voice tight with concentration as she maneuvered to avoid multiple incoming missiles. The SA-21 is using shoot-and-scoot tactics. The situation was becoming desperate. The SA-21's missiles were still flying toward the French formation, and Sarah had failed to neutralize the launcher. But her years of combat experience had taught her to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. If she couldn't destroy the missile battery, she would have to find another way to protect the French pilots. Sarah's solution was both brilliant and incredibly dangerous. Instead of continuing to pursue the relocated SA-21 launcher, she turned her F-35 toward the incoming missiles that were targeting the French Rafales. Her plan was to use the F-35's advanced electronic warfare systems to interfere with the missiles' guidance systems, potentially causing them to lose track of their targets. "Phoenix Lead, what are you doing?" came Captain Morrison's alarmed voice. "You're flying directly toward active SAMs." "I'm going to try to spoof the missile guidance systems," Sarah replied, her F-35 accelerating toward the incoming SA-21 missiles. The Rafales don't have the electronic warfare capabilities to defend against these weapons, but the F-35 does. What Sarah attempted next had never been tried in combat. She positioned her F-35 between the incoming missiles and the French formation, then activated every electronic warfare system on her aircraft simultaneously. The stealth fighter began broadcasting false target information, attempting to convince the SA-21 missiles that they were targeting the wrong aircraft. The technique worked partially. 2 of the 4 incoming missiles lost lock and began chasing false targets generated by Sarah's electronic warfare systems. But the other 2 missiles, equipped with more advanced guidance systems, continued toward the French formation, despite the electronic interference. Sarah realized she had only one option left to save the French pilots. She turned her F-35 directly toward the remaining missiles and began broadcasting her own aircraft signature as a more attractive target. It was an incredibly dangerous maneuver that essentially involved painting a target on her own aircraft to draw the missiles away from the Rafales. "Phoenix Lead, you're deliberately attracting missile lock." Morrison's voice carried a mixture of admiration and horror. "Sometimes you have to make yourself the biggest target to protect others," Sarah replied, her aircraft now being actively pursued by 2 SA-21 missiles, while simultaneously being engaged by multiple short-range systems from the ground. The next 30 seconds would determine whether Sarah's sacrifice would save the French pilots or simply add another casualty to the growing battle. Her F-35's defensive systems were operating beyond their design parameters, and the aircraft was taking damage from near-miss explosions that were getting closer with each passing second. But Sarah's tactical gamble was working. The 2 SA-21 missiles had been successfully diverted from the French formation and were now pursuing her F-35. The Rafale pilots, finally clear of the immediate missile threat, were able to turn away from the combat zone and begin their escape to safety. Mistral formation, this is Phoenix lead. Sarah transmitted on emergency frequencies, hoping the French pilots could hear her through the jamming. You are clear of the immediate threat. Proceed to Rally Point Alpha and await escort. Captain. Dubois's voice came through the static. Phoenix lead, we copy. Thank you for the warning. We owe you our lives. But Sarah's relief was short-lived. Her threat warning system was now showing an unprecedented number of hostile contacts. The entire enemy air defense network was converging on her position. And she was still being pursued by the two S-21 missiles that she had deliberately attracted. The two S-21 missiles pursuing Sarah's F-35 were closing rapidly, their advanced guidance systems proving resistant to the stealth fighter's electronic countermeasures. Sarah's aircraft was now flying through a three-dimensional maze of hostile fire, with surface-to-air missiles approaching from multiple directions, while enemy fighters continued their pursuit from above. The tactical situation had evolved into a desperate fight for survival against overwhelming odds. Phoenix lead, this is Baltic Control, came an urgent transmission from NATO headquarters. We're tracking your situation. Recommend immediate egress from the threat zone. Sarah's response was calm despite the chaos surrounding her aircraft. Baltic Control, negative on the egress. I still have 26 NATO pilots scattered across the combat zone, and Phoenix Flight is fully engaged with hostile forces. I'm not leaving until everyone is accounted for. The statement revealed the full scope of Sarah's mission. While she had successfully warned and protected the French Rafale formation, the majority of the exercise pilots were still in danger. Her sensors were detecting aircraft signatures throughout the combat zone: American F-16s, German Eurofighter Typhoons, British F-18s, and other NATO aircraft that were flying blind through an increasingly deadly environment. Sarah began implementing a tactical solution that drew upon every lesson she had learned in 25 years of combat flying. Instead of simply trying to evade the missiles pursuing her, she was going to use them as weapons against the hostile air defense network. Her plan was to lead the SA-21 missiles through the enemy's own defensive positions, forcing the surface-to-air missile systems to engage targets in their own airspace. The maneuver required precision flying and split-second timing. Sarah dove her F-35 toward a cluster of SF-15 mobile missile launchers, the pursuing SA-21 missiles following close behind. At the last possible moment, she pulled up sharply while deploying every electronic countermeasure in her arsenal. The SA-21 missiles, traveling at 3 times the speed of sound, were unable to make the same sharp turn and continued their trajectory toward the SA-15 positions below. The result was spectacular and devastating. The SA-21 missiles, their guidance systems confused by Sarah's electronic warfare, detonated among the SA-15 launchers, destroying 3 mobile missile systems in a chain of explosions that lit up the night sky. Sarah had successfully turned the enemy's own weapons against them, eliminating a significant portion of the air defense network. Phoenix lead, this is 2, came Captain Morrison's excited voice. That was incredible. You just used enemy missiles to take out enemy positions. But Sarah had no time to celebrate her tactical innovation. Her sensors were detecting new threats as the hostile forces adapted to the NATO response. Additional fighter aircraft were launching from bases deeper inside enemy territory, and more sophisticated air defense systems were being moved into position. Phoenix Flight, we need to start coordinating the extraction of the remaining exercise pilots, Sarah announced. I'm going to attempt to establish communications with the scattered formations. The challenge was enormous. The electronic jamming was preventing normal radio communications, and the exercise pilots were spread across hundreds of square miles of contested airspace. Sarah would need to locate each group of aircraft individually, warn them of the danger, and guide them to safety while continuing to fight off hostile forces. Sarah began a systematic search pattern that took her F-35 through the most dangerous areas of the combat zone. Her first success came when she located a formation of 4 German Eurofighter Typhoons that were flying directly toward a concentration of SA-19 missile systems. Using the same visual communication techniques she had employed with the French pilots, Sarah was able to warn the Germans and guide them away from the threat. The German flight leader, Major Klaus Thunder Weber, was quick to understand Sarah's warnings and began implementing evasive maneuvers. But the SA-19 systems had already detected the Typhoons and were preparing to engage. Sarah realized she would need to provide active protection for the German pilots. German formation, this is Phoenix lead. Sarah transmitted on all frequencies, hoping the Typhoon pilots could hear her. You are being targeted by SA-19 systems. Follow my aircraft for immediate egress. Sarah's F-35 positioned itself between the German Typhoons and the hostile missile sites, once again using her aircraft as a shield to protect friendly forces. The SA-19 missiles, detecting the F-35 signature, shifted their targeting to the stealth fighter instead of the more vulnerable Typhoons. The pattern continued for the next 40 minutes as Sarah systematically located and protected groups of NATO exercise pilots throughout the combat zone. She found and warned a formation of British F-18s, guided Italian Tornado aircraft away from hostile fighters, and coordinated the extraction of Polish F-16s that had become separated from their formation. Each rescue operation required Sarah to expose her aircraft to additional danger, and the cumulative damage was beginning to affect the F-35's performance. Warning lights were flashing on her instrument panel, indicating system failures and battle damage that reduced her aircraft's capabilities. But Sarah continued the mission, driven by the knowledge that NATO pilots were depending on her for survival. Phoenix lead, this is Phoenix 3, came Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski's voice, strained with fatigue and combat stress. I'm running low on ammunition and fuel. We need to consider extraction soon. Sarah checked her own fuel and weapons status. The extended combat had depleted her resources significantly, and her aircraft's battle damage was becoming increasingly serious, but her sensors were still detecting scattered NATO aircraft in the combat zone. Phoenix flight, I'm showing 6 more aircraft signatures in the northern sector, Sarah announced. We can't leave them behind. The final phase of the rescue mission was about to begin, and it would test Sarah's skills and determination to their absolute limits. The hostile forces, having learned from the previous engagements, were preparing a coordinated response that would challenge even the F-35's advanced capabilities. But Sarah Mitchell had not come this far to abandon NATO pilots. In their hour of greatest need, the woman who had been told she was too old for the F-35 program was about to demonstrate why experience and determination were more valuable than youth and technology. The final 6 aircraft Sarah detected in the northern sector turned out to be the most challenging rescue of the entire mission. Her sensors identified them as a mixed formation of American F-16s and Canadian CF-18 Hornets that had become separated from the main exercise and were flying directly into the most heavily defended area of hostile airspace. Unlike the previous rescues, these aircraft were approaching a concentration of enemy forces that included both advanced air defense systems and fighter aircraft. Sarah's F-35 was now operating with multiple system failures and critically low fuel reserves. Her electronic warfare systems were functioning at reduced capacity due to battle damage, and her weapons inventory was nearly exhausted. But the sight of 6 NATO aircraft flying unknowingly toward destruction galvanized her resolve. Phoenix flight, this is lead, she announced to her formation. I'm going after the northern group. You have permission to egress and return to base. Captain Morrison's response was immediate and firm. Negative, Colonel. We're not leaving you to face this alone. Phoenix Flight will complete the mission together." The loyalty and courage of her wingmen was deeply moving, but Sarah knew that asking them to continue the mission was potentially asking them to die alongside her. The fuel situation was critical for all 4 F-35s, and the hostile forces had concentrated their most advanced systems in the northern sector. "Jake, Anna. Hans, you've already done more than anyone could ask. Those pilots are my responsibility." Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski's voice cut through the radio static. "Colonel, with respect, those pilots are NATO's responsibility, and we're NATO. We finish this together." The final approach to the northern sector required the 4 F-35s to penetrate, the heaviest concentration of air defenses they had yet encountered. The hostile forces had learned from the previous engagements and deployed their most advanced systems to prevent further NATO rescues. Sarah's formation faced ESA-21 Growler systems, ESA-15 Gauntlet units, advanced electronic warfare platforms, and at least 12 enemy fighter aircraft. As they approached the threatened NATO formation, Sarah's sensors detected something that made her heart skip a beat. The 6 aircraft were not just any NATO pilots. They included 2 of the instructors from her original F-35 training program, pilots who had helped shape her understanding of the aircraft's capabilities. "Phoenix Lead, this is Viper Lead," came a familiar voice over the emergency frequency. Captain Jake Morrison from her training class was leading the threatened formation, along with instructor pilot Major Sarah Hawk Rodriguez, no relation to her mentor, but one of the most respected F-35 pilots in the program. "Viper Lead, this is Phoenix Lead," Sarah transmitted, her voice filled with determination. "You are flying into heavy SAM coverage and multiple hostile fighters. Recommend immediate turn to heading 270. But the electronic jamming was preventing clear communications, and the NATO formation continued on their dangerous course. Sarah realized she would need to conduct her most complex rescue operation, yet protecting 6 aircraft simultaneously, while engaging multiple hostile threats with a damaged F-35 and nearly empty fuel tanks. Sarah's tactical solution was brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its execution. Instead of trying to fight through the enemy defenses, she was going to collapse them from the inside. Using her remaining weapons and the F-35's advanced electronic warfare capabilities, she would create a cascade failure in the hostile air defense network that would open a corridor for the trapped NATO pilots. "Phoenix Flight, we're going to implement a coordinated electronic attack on the ESA-21 network," Sarah announced. "When I give the signal, all aircraft activate maximum jamming on the primary radar frequencies." The coordinated electronic warfare attack began at 0455 hours. All 4 F-35s simultaneously activated their electronic warfare systems, creating an intense blanket of jamming that overwhelmed the hostile radar networks. The ESA-21 systems, suddenly blinded by electronic interference, began shutting down to prevent damage to their sensitive equipment, but Sarah's plan went beyond simple jamming. As the SA-21 systems went offline, she launched her last 2 anti-radiation missiles at the electronic warfare platforms that were coordinating the enemy response. The missiles found their targets with devastating accuracy, eliminating the command and control systems that allowed the hostile forces to coordinate their defenses. The result was exactly what Sarah had predicted: a cascade failure that created a temporary corridor through the enemy defenses. The hostile air defense network, deprived of its coordination systems and blinded by electronic jamming, was unable to maintain effective coverage of the northern sector. "All NATO aircraft, this is Phoenix Lead," Sarah broadcast on all frequencies. "You have a clear corridor bearing 270. Egress immediately. The window will only be open for 5 minutes." The response was immediate. The 6 NATO aircraft, finally able to receive Sarah's transmissions, turned toward the escape corridor and began accelerating away from the threat zone. Behind them, the 4 F-35s provided rear-guard protection, using their remaining defensive capabilities to ensure the rescue succeeded, but the mission's success came at a cost. Sarah's F-35, already damaged and low on fuel, had expended its last weapons and pushed its systems beyond safe operating limits. Warning lights were flashing throughout her cockpit, and her engines were showing signs of imminent failure. "Phoenix, lead, you need to egress immediately," came Major Rodriguez's voice over the radio. "Your aircraft is showing severe battle damage." Sarah looked at her instrument panel and realized that her F-35 might not have enough fuel to reach friendly airspace. But all 30 NATO pilots were now safe, and the mission was complete. The woman who had been told she was too old for the F-35 program had just conducted the most successful rescue operation in modern NATO history. As her damaged F-35 limped toward friendly territory, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Age had never been the limiting factor. Experience, determination, and the willingness to sacrifice for others had made the difference when it mattered most. The rescue of 30 NATO pilots would become legendary in military aviation history, proving that sometimes the most valuable pilot is not the youngest, but the one with the wisdom to know when experience matters more than technology. The emergency landing at Ramstein Air Base was a testament to both Sarah's piloting skills and the F-35's remarkable engineering. Her aircraft touched down with smoke trailing from damaged systems, hydraulic fluid leaking from multiple punctures, and engines that were operating on their final reserves. The crash crews were already in position as her F-35 rolled to a stop on the runway, its battle-scarred airframe telling the story of the most intense aerial combat mission in recent NATO history. As Sarah climbed out of her cockpit, she was greeted by a scene of controlled chaos. Ground crews were examining the extensive battle damage to her aircraft, while intelligence officers were preparing to debrief her on the mission's tactical details. But Sarah's first concern was for her wingmen and the pilots they had rescued. "Phoenix 2, 3, and 4 status report," she called over the radio as she walked away from her damaged F-35. Captain Morrison's voice came through clearly. "Phoenix flight is all accounted for, Colonel. Minor battle damage to all aircraft, but everyone made it home." The relief in Morrison's voice was palpable. The mission that had begun 18 hours earlier with the rescue of 30 NATO pilots had concluded with all aircraft and personnel safe. It was an outcome that military analysts would later describe as miraculous, given the intensity of the opposition they had faced. Within an hour of landing, Sarah found herself in a secure briefing room surrounded by NATO's highest-ranking military officials. General Patricia Hayes, the Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff, who had originally approved Sarah's entry into the F-35 program, was participating via secure video link from the Pentagon. The debriefing would provide critical intelligence about the hostile forces' capabilities and tactics. "Colonel Mitchell," began General Hayes, "preliminary reports suggest that your mission encountered weapons systems and tactics that exceed our current intelligence assessments. We need a complete tactical breakdown of everything you observed." Sarah spent the next 4 hours providing detailed accounts of the mission's key moments. She described the AI-guided missiles that had adapted to F-35 countermeasures, the sophisticated electronic warfare systems that had created unprecedented jamming environments, and the coordinated air defense networks that had demonstrated capabilities far beyond NATO's estimates. "The hostile forces have clearly been studying our tactics and technology," Sarah explained. "They deployed countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize the F-35's advantages. If we hadn't been able to adapt our tactics in real time, the mission would have failed." Lieutenant Colonel David Torch Williams, Sarah's former F-35 instructor, was among the debriefing officers. "Colonel Mitchell, your tactical innovations during this mission, using enemy missiles against their own positions, coordinating electronic warfare attacks, implementing visual communication protocols. These weren't part of standard F-35 doctrine. Where did these techniques come from? Sarah's answer was simple but profound. Experience, sir. 25 years of combat flying teaches you that technology is only as good as the pilot using it. When standard procedures don't work, you have to improvise based on everything you've learned. The intelligence gathered during Sarah's mission would fundamentally change NATO's understanding of modern aerial warfare. The hostile forces had demonstrated capabilities that required immediate updates to F-35 tactics, training protocols, and operational procedures. Sarah's mission report would become required, reading at military academies and tactical schools worldwide, but the mission's impact extended far beyond intelligence gathering. The successful rescue of 30 NATO pilots under impossible conditions had demonstrated the strategic value of experienced aviators in modern warfare. The debate over age limits in advanced aircraft programs would be forever changed by Sarah's performance. 3 days after the mission, Sarah received a call that would reshape her military career. General Hayes was on the line with an offer that recognized both her tactical brilliance and her value as a strategic asset. Sarah, the Joint Chiefs have approved the creation of a new position, Director of Advanced Tactical Development, for the F-35 program. The job involves developing new tactics based on real-world combat experience and training the next generation of F-35 pilots. We want you to lead this effort. The offer was both an honor and a recognition of how the mission had changed everything. Sarah would be responsible for incorporating the lessons learned from her combat experience into official F-35 doctrine, ensuring that future pilots would be better prepared for the complex threats they might face. General, I'm honored by the offer, Sarah replied. But I have one condition. The program must include experienced pilots from all NATO nations. This mission succeeded because it combined American technology with Polish courage, German precision, and international cooperation. The future of aerial warfare is multinational, General Hayes smiled. Sarah, that's exactly why you're the right person for this job. You understand that experience and wisdom are force multipliers that can't be replaced by technology alone. The establishment of Sarah's new program would have far-reaching effects on military aviation. Her emphasis on combining technological capabilities with tactical experience would influence F-35 training protocols for decades to come. The program would also serve as a model for other advanced aircraft systems, demonstrating the value of retaining experienced pilots in operational roles. But perhaps the most significant impact of Sarah's mission was its effect on military personnel policies. The Pentagon began reviewing age restrictions across all advanced aircraft programs, recognizing that chronological age was a poor predictor of tactical effectiveness. Sarah's performance had proven that experience, judgment, and adaptability were more valuable than youth in modern warfare. Within 6 months of the mission, the F-35 program had modified its selection criteria to include a track for experienced pilots. The Mitchell Protocol, as it became known informally, created pathways for seasoned aviators to transition to advanced aircraft regardless of their age. The program would produce some of the most effective F-35 pilots in NATO service. Sarah's story also inspired a new generation of military aviators who saw that excellence and dedication could overcome institutional bias. Her example demonstrated that the most important qualifications for advanced aircraft were not found on a birth certificate, but in the accumulated wisdom of years spent mastering the art of aerial combat. The mission that had begun with Sarah being told she was too old for the F-35 program had ended with her establishing new standards for what it meant to be a military aviator in the modern era. Her legacy would extend far beyond the 30 pilots she had saved, influencing military policy and inspiring aviators for generations to come. 6 months after the mission, Sarah stood before an audience of 500 NATO pilots at the International Fighter Conference in London. The gathering represented the finest military aviators from 29 nations, all eager to hear from the pilot who had redefined modern aerial warfare. Her presentation, titled Experience as a Force Multiplier, Lessons from Modern Combat, would become one of the most influential talks in military aviation history. When I first applied to the F-35 program at age 44, Sarah began, I was told that my experience was less valuable than a younger pilot's potential longevity. Today, I want to share what I've learned about the relationship between experience and effectiveness in modern warfare. The audience was captivated as Sarah detailed the tactical decisions that had made the rescue mission successful. She explained how her years of combat experience had allowed her to recognize patterns in enemy behavior, adapt to unexpected threats, and make split-second decisions that saved lives. Her analysis revealed that the mission's success had depended not on the F-35's technology alone, but on the combination of advanced systems with seasoned judgment. The hostile forces we encountered had studied our technology and developed countermeasures, specifically designed to neutralize our advantages, Sarah explained. Standard procedures and pre-programmed responses were insufficient. Success required the ability to improvise, adapt, and think several moves ahead capabilities that only come from years of real-world experience. Among the audience was Captain Jake Morrison, now promoted to Major and serving as Sarah's deputy in the Advanced Tactical Development Program. His transformation from skeptical young pilot to devoted advocate of experience-based training reflected the broader changes occurring throughout NATO Air Forces. After Sarah's presentation, Major Morrison addressed the audience. 3 years ago, I questioned whether older pilots belonged in advanced aircraft programs. Colonel Mitchell's mission taught me that experience isn't just valuable, it's irreplaceable. The tactics she developed under fire have become standard doctrine for F-35 operations worldwide. The conference marked the official launch of the Mitchell Protocol across all NATO air forces. The program had already produced remarkable results, with experienced pilots achieving higher mission success rates and lower casualty rates than their younger counterparts in comparable scenarios. The data supported what Sarah had always believed, that wisdom and judgment were as important as reflexes and technological familiarity. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a military psychologist from the Spanish Air Force, presented research that had been inspired by Sarah's mission. Our studies show that pilots with extensive combat experience demonstrate superior decision-making under stress, better threat assessment capabilities, and more effective crew resource management. Age-related declines in reaction time are more than compensated for by improvements in tactical thinking and situational awareness. The research validated Sarah's approach to modern warfare and influenced military policies far beyond aviation. Ground forces, naval operations, and special operations units began implementing similar programs that valued experience alongside youth. The traditional military emphasis on physical capabilities was being balanced with recognition of intellectual and tactical assets. But perhaps the most significant development was the impact on individual military careers. Pilots like Lieutenant Colonel Anna Kowalski, Major Hans Mueller, and hundreds of others found new opportunities in advanced aircraft programs that had previously been closed to them. The ripple effects of Sarah's mission were creating career paths that valued accumulated expertise over simple chronological age. The changes weren't limited to NATO forces. Military organizations worldwide began studying the lessons from Sarah's mission and implementing their own versions of experience-based pilot programs. The tactical innovations she had developed during the rescue operation were being taught in Air Force academies from Australia to South Korea. Sarah's new role as Director of Advanced Tactical Development allowed her to institutionalize the lessons learned from her combat experience. Her team developed training scenarios based on real-world threats, created tactical manuals that combined technology with experience-based decision-making, and established mentorship programs that paired seasoned pilots with younger aviators. The mentorship component proved particularly valuable. Young F-35 pilots trained alongside experienced aviators learned not just how to operate the aircraft systems, but how to think tactically in complex environments. The program produced pilots who were technically proficient and tactically sophisticated, combining the best aspects of youth and experience. 1 year after the mission, Sarah received news that validated everything she had fought for. The F-35 program reported its highest mission success rates in history, with accident rates at all-time lows. The combination of advanced technology with experienced pilots had created capabilities that exceeded the sum of their individual parts. "Data is clear," reported General Hayes during a Pentagon briefing. "The Mitchell Protocol has produced measurable improvements in every metric we track: mission effectiveness, pilot safety, tactical innovation, and operational readiness." Colonel Mitchell's approach has become the gold standard for advanced aircraft programs. The success of Sarah's program attracted attention from civilian aviation as well. Commercial airlines began implementing similar policies that valued experience over age restrictions, recognizing that the principles of aviation excellence applied regardless of whether the mission was military or civilian. Sarah's story also inspired changes in other male-dominated fields where age and gender discrimination had limited opportunities for experienced professionals. Her example demonstrated that excellence could overcome institutional bias and that diversity of experience strengthened organizations. The transformation of military aviation culture was perhaps Sarah's greatest achievement. The service that had once questioned her value based on her age now recognized her as one of its most valuable strategic assets. Her influence extended far beyond the 30 pilots she had rescued, affecting the careers and opportunities of thousands of military aviators worldwide. But for Sarah personally, the most meaningful recognition came from the pilots she had saved. Each of the 30 NATO aviators sent personal letters expressing their gratitude, many including photos of their families and stories of milestones they had been able to achieve because Sarah had brought them home safely. Captain Philippe Dubois, the French Rafale pilot whose formation Sarah had saved, wrote, "Colonel Mitchell, you gave me the chance to see my daughter take her first steps, to celebrate my son's graduation, and to grow old with the woman I love. Your courage gave 30 families their futures back. We will never forget." The letters reminded Sarah why she had fought so hard to prove herself worthy of the F-35 program. It wasn't about personal vindication or career advancement. It was about being in a position to make a difference when lives hung in the balance. 2 years after the rescue mission that changed everything, Sarah Mitchell found herself standing in the Rose Garden of the White House, surrounded by the 30 NATO pilots whose lives she had saved. The ceremony was both a recognition of individual heroism and a celebration of the international cooperation that had made the mission possible. President Harrison, flanked by NATO Secretary General Anderson and defense ministers from 6 nations, was about to present the highest military honors their respective countries could bestow. "Colonel Sarah Mitchell," the president began, "your actions on September 15, 2022, represent the finest traditions of military service: courage under fire, selfless dedication to fellow service members, and tactical brilliance that saved lives and strengthened the alliance we hold dear." The Medal of Honor ceremony was unprecedented in its international scope. Sarah would become the first pilot in history to receive the highest military decorations from 6 different NATO nations. Simultaneously, the Polish Virtuti Militari, German Knight's Cross, French Legion d'Honneur, British Distinguished Service Order, Canadian Cross of Valor, and American Medal of Honor represented not just individual recognition, but acknowledgement of how one person's courage had strengthened an entire alliance. As each medal was presented, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The faces of every pilot she had saved were etched in her memory, young aviators just beginning their careers, experienced pilots with families at home, instructors who had dedicated their lives to training the next generation. Each represented a future that had been preserved by the mission's success. Captain Jake Morrison, now Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, and Sarah's successor as squadron commander, stood among the honored guests. His presence symbolized the transformation that had occurred throughout NATO air forces since the mission. The young pilot who had once questioned whether experience belonged in modern warfare had become one of its most effective advocates. The rescue of 30 NATO pilots was remarkable, the president continued. But Colonel Mitchell's true legacy lies in how she changed our understanding of military excellence. Her example proved that wisdom and experience are force multipliers that cannot be replaced by technology alone. The ceremony concluded with presentations from the rescued pilots themselves. Captain Philippe Dubois, representing the international group, spoke on behalf of all 30 aviators. Colonel Mitchell gave us something more precious than life. She gave us our futures. Because of her courage, we have been able to serve our nations, raise our families, and pursue our dreams. Her legacy lives in every day we have been privileged to experience since that September morning. Following the White House ceremony, Sarah returned to her duties at the Advanced Tactical Development Center, now expanded into a permanent NATO institution. The center had become the premier training facility for experienced pilots transitioning to advanced aircraft, with programs that had been adopted by air forces worldwide. The Mitchell Protocol had evolved into a comprehensive approach to military aviation that balanced technological capability with human expertise. Fighter pilot training programs now included mandatory mentorship components, tactical decision-making courses based on real-world scenarios, and career tracks that valued accumulated experience alongside technical proficiency. The statistical results were undeniable. NATO air forces reported their highest mission success rates in history, with safety improvements that had saved hundreds of additional lives. The program had also produced a new generation of tactically sophisticated pilots who combined technical mastery with strategic thinking. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, the military psychologist who had studied the mission's lessons, published research that became the foundation for modern military personnel policy. Her work demonstrated that the relationship between age and performance was far more complex than traditional models suggested, leading to policy changes that affected every branch of military service. Colonel Mitchell's mission proved that we had been measuring the wrong variables, Dr. Rodriguez explained in her landmark study. Instead of focusing on chronological age, we should evaluate tactical thinking, decision-making under stress, and the ability to adapt to unexpected circumstances. These capabilities often improve with experience. The research influenced civilian industries as well, leading to changes in hiring practices and career development, programs that valued experience over youth and critical decision-making roles. Sarah's impact extended far beyond military aviation, affecting how society understood the relationship between age and capability. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact was on military culture itself. The armed forces that had once prioritized youth above all else began recognizing that diversity of experience strengthened overall capability. Veterans who might have been forced into early retirement found new opportunities to contribute their expertise to critical missions. Sarah's story also inspired a new generation of military aviators who understood that excellence was not limited by age, gender, or conventional expectations. Young pilots sought out experienced mentors, while seasoned aviators found renewed purpose in sharing their knowledge with the next generation. 5 years after the mission, Sarah received a letter that captured the enduring impact of her example. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, a young F-35 pilot, wrote, "Colonel Mitchell, Your story inspired me to pursue military aviation, despite being told that my background made me unsuitable for fighter aircraft. Your example proved that determination and skill matter more than fitting traditional expectations. Thank you for showing us that excellence comes in many forms. The letter represented thousands of similar stories from military personnel who had found new opportunities because Sarah had proven that institutional bias could be overcome through excellence and determination. Her legacy lived not just in the policy she had influenced, but in the careers she had made possible. As Sarah reflected on her journey from rejected applicant to international hero, she realized that the mission's true success lay not in the medals or recognition, but in the lives that had been saved and the barriers that had been broken. The woman who had been told she was too old for the F-35 program had not only proven her critics wrong, she had changed the entire system that had tried to exclude her. The rescue of 30 NATO pilots had become a symbol of what was possible when experience, courage, and determination combined with advanced technology. Sarah Mitchell's story proved that sometimes the most qualified person for the job is not the youngest candidate, but the one with the wisdom to know that age is just a number when lives are on the line. Her legacy would inspire military aviators for generations to come, ensuring that future Sarah Mitchells would find opportunities to serve regardless of the numbers on their birth certificates. The sky, as Sarah had always believed, truly was the limit for those brave enough to reach for it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.